Dan, I was asked the other night, I was giving a speech about Bitcoin. So I figured we'll go right at it, you know? I mean, why waste time? We don't have a lot of time to waste. Just so you know, I'm a PayPal guy.
I know you are.
I swear, I can show you. You don't believe me?
I saw the tattoo.
Okay.
I
I run the whole band on PayPal. So here's what I said. I said it needs a digital currency. It needs a digital means of transferring and storing value and doing all those things that are done with money, but it hasn't decided yet what that is going to be. Is that the right way to think about it right now?
No, not really.
I like that.
So let me start off with, I think it is crucial that we figure out a way of utilizing technology to democratize financial services. I think we've got a population of almost 2 billion people who sit outside the financial services industry in the world, 70 million adults in the US who find it incredibly difficult to manage and move their money. Managing and moving money should be a right for all citizens, not a privilege for the affluent. And I think technologies like blockchain, the underlying protocol for Bitcoin, and others can help to enable that. But they're only enablers of a goal that we should all have as an industry, which is to drive financial health.
One thing that we hear a lot about is that we're dealing with this $20 trillion of debt. Should we be all that scared of it, or should we put it in perspective of it's a $19 trillion economy? So how worried should we really be?
Well, the answer is yes and yes. Yes, you should be scared of it, and yes, you should look at it relative to the economy. So when most economists look at the debt picture of a given country, they compare it to the GDP. Right now, we're at about 75% of GDP. We're all living much longer, which is great, but it means more years in retirement. And then you combine that large group with a very inefficient health care system that we have in this country. We spend way more on health care than many other nations. And you have a federal debt picture that makes the 20 trillion look like a small number. So our foundation is dedicated towards raising awareness and trying to challenge that and to address that challenge.
Here's the issue. 50% of Americans have less than $400 of savings. So you're wondering, like, are they thinking about the deficit, or they're not. They're wondering how to get by. You know, if we're wondering why they're anxious and worried about the future, it's because they're one step away from really going into a deepening crisis.
Another bridge to the macro here, and let me throw this to Greg, is that the data show that small business formation is sort of at a low. It's really been declining. And the lending data shows that people are focused a lot on the FICO scores rather than other things they may use, and that's been maybe a result of Dodd-Frank. I don't know what the actual culprit is, but it's harder to form a small business, and it's harder to get a loan to form a small business, and that's taken some of the dynamism out of the U.S. economy.
Yes, and we're living in a period now of very slow productivity growth. I mean, to some extent it might be an aftermath of the financial crisis, but a lot of people think it started before that. We're just in a period of very slow productivity growth, and we don't fully understand why, as macroeconomists, that is the case. The Trump administration says it's excessive regulation, and maybe there's some element of truth to that. But there's some economists who just think that technological progress has just not been as dynamic in the past decade as it had been, say, in the decades after World War II. There's some optimists out there. Eric Brynjolfsson at MIT is an optimist, and he's saying that the great productivity growth is around the corner. But we've been waiting for a while, and it hasn't showed up.
Michael, is there a way to think about teaching the public about the issues of government finance that relates in a way to their own personal experience? Because I think what Dan said is really interesting. They have $400 in the bank. The teachers in this audience and the people out there that are doing the economic education, what's the message they need to communicate?
Well, I think what we've found is what works very well is talking about interest costs, actually, because people understand interest. They pay it on their car loans, their mortgages, et cetera. And so a lot of the statistics we throw out there relate to interest costs. So we're going to spend $6 trillion on interest over the next 10 years. At the end of that decade, interest will be the third largest government program. So things like that capture people's frustration because they say, we don't want to spend that much on interest. In 2 or 3 years, we're going to spend more on interest than we are investing in our kids. So things like that tend to capture it more than a big number with a lot of zeros on it. But they're balancing their books at home. They're balancing their books in their companies. They get it. I don't think it's a problem that they're getting it. I think it's a lack of leadership at the federal level.
All right. I want to sincerely thank this great panel, Dan and Michael and Greg. And of course, I want to thank Nan again for having me out here.